The camera slowly pans over neatly trimmed lawns, mailboxes adorned with family names, and a light breeze rustling through the trees. This tranquil setting seems untouched by the chaos of the outside world. This was supposed to be just another ordinary day, but on August 23, 2023, this unassuming home became the epicenter of a nightmare. A mother, her young daughter, and a man trapped by his own demons. 3 lives intertwined in a story of love, anger, and ultimate betrayal. What happened inside those walls would shatter a family and leave a community reeling. The faint hum of police radios punctuates the heavy silence as forensic teams enter the home, their movements deliberate and precise. How does a domestic dispute escalate to such unimaginable violence? The narrator continues. And who bears the responsibility for this devastating outcome? Tonight, on CrimeByte, we retrace the steps that led to this tragedy and uncover the chilling truth behind one man's deadly decision. Welcome to CrimeByte, where we unravel the haunting stories behind humanity's darkest moments. From chilling mysteries to cases of betrayal that shock the soul, we dig deep to uncover the truth. If you're captivated by real-life investigations and untold stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Tonight, we bring you a story that will leave you questioning the fragility of trust and the devastating impact of unchecked rage. The story begins in the small, close-knit community of Wilson, North Carolina. Kiera Massenburg and her 6-year-old daughter, Zoey Jones, were more than just mother and child. They were inseparable. Their bond was the kind that brought warmth to anyone who witnessed it. An unspoken connection that radiated through shared smiles, giggles, and quiet moments spent together. Kiera was my best friend, her sister later recalled in an emotional interview. She wasn't just a mother, she was a protector, a nurturer, and the kind of person who made everyone feel loved. And Zoey was her world. She was this bright, bubbly little girl who could light up any room she walked into. Kiera, in her late 20s, was a single mother who had worked tirelessly to provide Zoey with a stable and loving home. Life hadn't always been easy, but Kiera approached every challenge with determination. By day, she worked as a healthcare assistant, a role she took immense pride in, knowing she was helping others. By night, she was Zoey's cheerleader, bedtime storyteller, and confidant. Kiera was one of those people who gave everything she had, whether it was to her job, her family, or her daughter, said a coworker who knew her well. She talked about Zoey all the time, her achievements in school, the funny things she'd say. You could tell Kiera's life revolved around her little girl. Zoey was equally adored by her community. A first grader with an infectious smile and a love for arts and crafts, she was the kind of child who made friends effortlessly. Teachers at her school described her as a bright and curious student who always tried to help others. She had such a big heart, said her teacher in a tearful interview. She was one of those kids who made you believe the world was still a good place. Despite the love and support surrounding them, Kiera and Zoey's life was not without challenges. Kiera had ended her relationship with Daquan Jones, Zoey's father, months earlier. While the split was necessary for Kiera's safety and well-being, it added an element of unpredictability to their lives. Daquan had a history of volatile behavior, which was one of the reasons Kiera had chosen to separate from him. But like many single mothers navigating co-parenting with a difficult partner, she tried to maintain a level of civility for Zoey's sake. She wanted Zoey to have a relationship with her father, said a family friend. But she also knew Daquan could be unpredictable. She just didn't want Zoey caught in the middle. This delicate balancing act would ultimately set the stage for the tragedy that followed. Despite her best efforts to shield Zoey from conflict, Kiera found herself in an impossible situation, one that no parent should ever have to face. How does a loving mother navigate the complexities of co-parenting with someone whose behavior is increasingly erratic? Could Kiera have foreseen the danger, or was she doing everything she could to protect her daughter? Kiera Massenburg and Daquan Jones began their relationship with the kind of promise and hope that many young couples share. In the beginning, Daquan seemed like the ideal partner, charming, attentive, and committed to building a future with Kiera and their newborn daughter, Zoey. But beneath the surface of their relationship lay a volatility that Kiera would only come to fully understand after it was too late. At first, he was so sweet, Kiera's sister recounted in a tearful interview. He did everything for her, bought flowers, helped around the house. We all thought he was perfect for her. But then things changed. Daquan's temper, once kept in check, began to flare. Small arguments turned into heated confrontations, and the trust that had once defined their relationship started to erode. The strain of financial pressures, unresolved personal issues, and Daquan's controlling nature created an environment of tension and unpredictability. Kiera confided in close friends about her growing concerns. She told me he would get mad over the littlest things, said a longtime friend. She tried to keep it together for Zoey, but I could see it was wearing on her. She was scared, but she didn't want to admit it. The breaking point came one night when an argument turned physical. The incident left Kiera shaken, but it also solidified her decision to end the relationship. She wanted to leave for good, Kiera's sister said. She knew she had to protect herself and Zoey, but it wasn't as simple as just walking away. He kept finding ways to insert himself into her life. Daquan's behavior became increasingly erratic in the months following their breakup. He would show up unannounced, call incessantly, and make veiled threats that left Kiera on edge. Despite the turmoil, Kiera remained committed to ensuring that Zoey maintained a relationship with her father. She believed it was important for her daughter to know both parents, even if the relationship between the adults was strained. She did it all for Zoey, said a family friend. She wanted her to have some kind of normal life, even if it meant dealing with Daquan's nonsense. However, the line between co-parenting and control became increasingly blurred. Daquan's demands grew more unreasonable, and his visits with Zoey became opportunities to exert dominance over Kiera. As tensions escalated, Kiera began seeking advice from friends and legal experts about how to manage the situation. She explored options for modifying custody arrangements, but hesitated to take drastic action, fearing it might provoke Daquan further. She was walking on eggshells, her sister said. She didn't want to upset him, but she also didn't want to give him complete control. This delicate balancing act was unsustainable. The cracks in their relationship widened with each encounter, and it became clear to those close to Kiera that Daquan's anger was reaching a boiling point. In the weeks leading up to the tragic event, friends noticed a shift in Daquan's demeanor. He became more withdrawn, erratic, and aggressive in his interactions. His recent release from jail on assault charges added another layer of tension, leaving Kiera even more anxious about her safety and that of her daughter. Kiera was terrified, a friend revealed. She didn't say it outright, but you could see it in her eyes. She was trying to hold everything together, but it was clear she was struggling. The relationship had turned into a ticking time bomb, and those closest to Kiera feared it was only a matter of time before something catastrophic happened. When does the desire to co-parent for a child's sake become too dangerous? Could Kiera have done anything differently to protect herself and Zoey from Daquan's escalating behavior? The events of August 23, 2023 began like any other day. Kiera Massenburg had planned a quick visit to Daquan Jones's home to pick up her daughter, Zoey. Despite their fraught relationship, Kiera maintained a semblance of civility during these exchanges, doing her best to shield Zoey from the tension that simmered between her and Daquan. Kiera was hesitant about going that day, her sister recalled in an emotional interview. She told me she didn't want to argue, but Daquan insisted she come. He said it was important. The tension was palpable from the moment Kiera arrived. Witnesses later described hearing raised voices inside the house, with Kiera pleading for calm, and Daquan growing increasingly agitated. "Why are you doing this to me?" Daquan reportedly shouted. "I told you I can't handle this anymore." Kiera tried to defuse the situation as she had done so many times before. But this time was different. Daquan wasn't just angry, he was unraveling. Kiera kept telling him she just wanted to take Zoey and leave, a neighbor recalled. But he wasn't listening. He was yelling about how she was ruining his life. The argument reached its breaking point when Daquan demanded that Kiera remove Zoey from his home permanently. He accused Kiera of using their daughter against him, twisting the narrative to suit his sense of victimhood. "I'm not taking her away from you," Kiera said firmly. "But this isn't healthy for any of us." Her refusal to comply with his demands was the spark that ignited Daquan's fury. He stormed out of the room, and for a brief moment the tension seemed to subside. But when he returned, he was holding a firearm. What happened next unfolded in a matter of seconds, but would leave scars that lasted a lifetime for those who survived. Witnesses described hearing 2 gunshots in quick succession, followed by a third moments later. Kiera Page, a friend who had been visiting the house, narrowly escaped, despite being shot twice in the back of the neck. The final gunshot was self-inflicted. By the time police arrived, the scene was one of devastation. Kiera and Zoey were both pronounced dead at the scene, their lives cut short in an instant of senseless violence. How can we better identify the warning signs of escalating domestic violence, and what steps can be taken to prevent tragedies like this from happening? The violent culmination of tensions between Kiera Massenburg and Daquan Jones on August 23, 2023, was as swift as it was devastating. Inside Daquan's home, the escalating argument took a deadly turn, unraveling in mere moments that would forever alter the lives of all involved. Witnesses described the argument as heated, but not entirely unexpected. For years, Kiera had navigated Daquan's unpredictable temper, often diffusing tense situations for the sake of their daughter Zoey. But this time, her attempts to calm him failed. According to neighbors, Kiera's refusal to permanently remove Zoey from Daquan's home struck a nerve. He kept shouting about how no one respected him, how everyone wanted to take something away from him. A neighbor later said. When Daquan left the room briefly, Kiera likely thought she had a moment to collect her thoughts or gather Zoey to leave. But when he returned, he was holding a gun. The first shot rang out, aimed directly at Kiera. She collapsed almost instantly, her protective instincts driving her to shield Zoey in her final moments. Witnesses later recounted hearing a second shot, followed by a child's scream that was abruptly silenced. She was just trying to protect her daughter, said Kiera Page, a survivor who narrowly escaped the scene despite being injured. I can't get the image out of my head, Zoey standing there crying, and then it was just silence. In the chaos, Kiera managed to crawl toward the front door after being shot twice. Her survival was a combination of sheer determination and luck. I thought I was going to die, she admitted later. But I had to keep moving. I couldn't let him finish what he started. Daquan's final act of violence was directed inward. After taking the lives of Kiera and Zoey, he turned the gun on himself. When police arrived minutes later, they found a scene of utter devastation. 3 lives lost, 1 woman critically injured, and a community forever scarred. Forensic investigators meticulously documented the scene, piecing together the sequence of events that had unfolded so rapidly. Each bullet casing, blood spatter pattern, and discarded item told a story of desperation, rage, and heartbreak. This wasn't just a crime scene, one detective remarked. It was a tragedy that could have been avoided if someone had intervened earlier. The evidence painted a grim picture. Daquan had planned this act of violence. The gun had been purchased weeks earlier, and text messages recovered from his phone hinted at his growing instability. One chilling message read, "I'm done being the bad guy. If they want to take everything from me, I'll make sure they regret it." As news of the incident spread, the community of Wilson grappled with the enormity of the loss. Vigils were held in memory of Kiera and Zoey, with candles and flowers placed outside the now vacant house. Kiera was a wonderful mother, her sister said during one such vigil, her voice breaking with emotion. And Zoey, she was just a child. She didn't deserve this. None of them did. The case sparked conversations about domestic violence and the systemic failures that often allow such situations to escalate unchecked. Friends and family questioned whether more could have been done to protect Kiera and Zoey from Daquan's volatile behavior. How many warning signs were there? One family friend asked. How many times did Kiera try to get help? And how many times was she told there was nothing anyone could do until it was too late? What systemic changes are needed to ensure that victims of domestic violence receive the protection and support they need before tragedies like this occur? The sounds of gunfire shattered the quiet suburban neighborhood of Wilson, North Carolina, on August 23, 2023. Those who lived nearby would later describe the moment as surreal, an ordinary evening disrupted by chaos and tragedy. For the witnesses inside and outside the home, however, the horror was far more personal. I heard 3 loud bangs, said one neighbor, visibly shaken in an interview. At first I thought it was fireworks or something, but then I heard someone screaming for help. That's when I knew something terrible had happened. Inside the house, the scene was pure chaos. Makia Page, a friend visiting the home, was among the first to realize the severity of the situation. She had been sitting in the living room when the argument between Kiera and Daquan escalated. The shouting grew louder, and then came the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. "I froze," Makia later recounted in a harrowing interview. "I didn't know what to do. I heard Kiera scream, and then another shot. It was like time stopped." Makia's survival was nothing short of miraculous. Despite being shot twice in the back of the neck, she managed to summon the strength to crawl toward the front door. "I just kept thinking, I have to get out of here," she said. "I didn't know if he was going to come after me next. But I couldn't stay there." Her escape was a testament to her will to survive, but it also left her haunted by the memories of what she witnessed. "I'll never forget the look on Kiera's face," she said, her voice breaking. She was trying to protect Zoey, even in her last moments. She was so brave. Outside the home, neighbors who heard the commotion rushed to help, but they were unprepared for the devastating scene that awaited them. One neighbor, who wished to remain anonymous, described the moment she saw Makia crawling out of the house. She was covered in blood, the neighbor said, tears streaming down her face. She kept saying, "He shot them, he shot them." I didn't know what to do except call 911. When first responders arrived, they were met with a scene of unimaginable devastation. Kiera and Zoey were both pronounced dead at the scene, their lives cut short by Daquan's rage. For the paramedics and officers who entered the home, the emotional toll was immediate. "This was one of the worst scenes I've ever encountered," said an officer who responded that night. "It's hard to see something like that and not take it home with you." The aftermath of the tragedy left a lasting impact on the witnesses, many of whom struggled with feelings of guilt and helplessness. "I keep asking myself if there was something I could have done to stop it," Makia said. "But I know that's not fair. Daquan was the one who made that choice, not me, not Kiera." The community also grappled with the ripple effects of the violence. Neighbors who had once felt secure in their quiet suburb now questioned their own safety and the systems in place to prevent such tragedies. "How does something like this happen here?" one resident asked. "This is supposed to be a safe place. How do we protect the people we care about when something like this can happen in a heartbeat? How can we support survivors and witnesses of violent crimes as they process the trauma and grief that follows such events? And what role does the community play in healing after tragedy strikes?" To understand the tragic events of August 23, 2023, one must delve into the life and psyche of Daquan Jones, the man whose actions shattered the lives of Kiera Massenburg, her daughter Zoey, and the entire community of Wilson, North Carolina. Daquan was not born a monster. He was a man shaped by a combination of personal struggles, unresolved trauma, and a volatile temperament that ultimately spiraled out of control. Daquan had a tough upbringing, said a childhood friend who wished to remain anonymous. His family didn't have much, and he had to grow up fast. But back then, he was just like any other kid. He had dreams, you know. In his early years, Daquan showed promise. He was a gifted athlete and had a knack for making people laugh. But those close to him also noticed a darker side, a temper that flared in moments of frustration, a tendency to hold grudges, and a difficulty trusting others. Daquan always felt like the world was against him, said a former coach. He could be the nicest kid one minute, but if something didn't go his way, it was like flipping a switch. You could see the anger in his eyes. As Daquan grew older, his struggles deepened. Financial hardships, unstable relationships, and brushes with the law became recurring themes in his life. He bounced between jobs, unable to maintain steady employment, and often found himself at odds with authority figures. He had a lot of baggage, said an ex-girlfriend who requested anonymity. He didn't know how to handle stress, and when he got angry, it was scary. "I stayed as long as I could, but I knew I had to leave for my own safety." Daquan's relationship with Kiera began like many others, full of hope and promise. Friends and family initially saw him as a devoted partner and father. But as time went on, the cracks in his facade began to show. Kiera thought she could help him, said a family friend. She believed in giving people second chances, but Daquan took advantage of that. He didn't change, he got worse. The turning point came in the months leading up to the tragedy. Daquan's behavior became increasingly erratic, marked by mood swings, paranoia, and a growing obsession with control. His recent release from jail on assault charges only added to the tension. He was spiraling, said a coworker who had worked with Daquan briefly. He'd come in one day and be fine, and the next day he'd be slamming doors and yelling at people. You could tell something was eating at him. Text messages and social media posts recovered during the investigation revealed Daquan's mindset in the weeks leading up to the crime. One post, written just days before the shootings, read, "Tired of being the bad guy. Maybe it's time to show people what I'm really capable of." These messages painted a picture of a man who felt cornered, overwhelmed, and desperate to assert control over a life he believed was slipping through his fingers. Forensic psychologists who analyzed the case offered insights into Daquan's behavior. "This was a classic case of coercive control," one expert explained. Daquan saw Kiera's independence as a threat. He didn't just want her to stay, he wanted to dominate her, to make her feel as powerless as he felt in his own life. This need for control, coupled with unresolved anger and a sense of entitlement, created a dangerous cocktail that ultimately led to the tragedy. While many were quick to label Daquan as a monster, others saw his actions as the culmination of years of neglect, untreated mental health issues, and societal failures. "He was a broken man," said a childhood friend, "but that doesn't excuse what he did. He had choices, and he chose to destroy the people who cared about him most." How do we reconcile the need to understand the factors that lead to violent behavior with the imperative to hold individuals accountable for their actions? And what can be done to address the warning signs before it's too late? The 911 calls began pouring in shortly after the gunfire erupted in the quiet Wilson, North Carolina neighborhood on August 23, 2023. Panicked neighbors reported hearing multiple shots and screams coming from Daquan Jones's home. The responders knew this was no ordinary domestic disturbance call. It was something far more sinister. Within minutes, law enforcement and emergency medical teams were on the scene. What they found inside the home would haunt even the most seasoned officers. As the first patrol car arrived, the scene was chaotic. Neighbors had gathered outside, their faces pale with fear and confusion. Several pointed toward the house, shouting that someone had crawled out and was bleeding in the driveway. "I'll never forget what I saw that day," said Officer James Monroe, one of the first responders. "It was like stepping into a nightmare. Blood on the floor, bullet casings scattered everywhere, and that eerie silence. It's something you never get used to." The officers immediately focused on securing the scene and checking for survivors. They found Makia Page, a friend of Kiera's, lying in the driveway covered in blood but conscious. Despite her injuries, she managed to provide critical information. Her account confirmed what officers feared. Multiple victims were inside the house. As they entered, they found Kiera and Zoey lifeless in the living room. Daquan's body was nearby, the gun still in his hand. The scene was devastating, evidence of a final violent act that spared no one. Forensic teams arrived shortly after to begin documenting the crime scene. Every detail was meticulously recorded. The position of the bodies, the trajectory of the bullets, the overturned furniture, and the discarded toys that painted a tragic picture of a life interrupted. It was clear from the outset that this was a premeditated act, said Detective Lisa Carter, who led the investigation. The placement of the victims, the weapon, the text messages on Daquan's phone, it all pointed to a calculated plan. Makia's survival proved crucial to the investigation. Though severely injured, she provided key details about the argument that led to the shooting. Her testimony, combined with the physical evidence, painted a chilling picture of Daquan's final moments. "I kept telling them to calm down," Makia recounted in a hospital interview, "but he wouldn't stop yelling. And then he just snapped." The police response didn't end with securing the scene. Officers also worked to support the devastated community, which was struggling to process the tragedy. Counselors were brought in to speak with neighbors and provide resources for those affected by the trauma. "This wasn't just a crime against one family," said Sheriff Mark Daniels. "This was a crime against the entire community. Our job isn't just to find answers. It's to help everyone affected find some semblance of healing." As investigators pieced together the events of that day, they faced an unsettling realization. The system had failed Kiera and Zoey. Despite Daquan's history of violence, no safeguards were in place to prevent him from acquiring a weapon, or escalating his behavior. The signs were there, Detective Carter admitted. But like so many cases of domestic violence, it wasn't taken seriously until it was too late. The response from law enforcement, while swift, highlighted systemic shortcomings in addressing domestic violence. Friends and family of Kiera expressed frustration that more hadn't been done to protect her and Zoey. She went to the police. She got a restraining order, said Kiera's sister during a vigil. What more could she have done? Why wasn't that enough? The tragic outcome of this case spurred conversations about the need for stronger domestic violence protections, better enforcement of restraining orders, and greater access to mental health services for individuals like Daquan. This wasn't just a failure of one person, said a domestic violence advocate. This was a systemic failure, and if we don't address it, we'll keep seeing tragedies like this. How can law enforcement and communities work together to prevent domestic violence from escalating into tragedy? What changes need to happen to ensure that victims are truly protected? The tragic events of August 23, 2023, left an indelible mark on the Wilson, North Carolina community. In the days and weeks that followed, shock gave way to grief, and grief transformed into a collective determination to ensure that Kiera Massenburg and Zoey Jones would not be forgotten. The aftermath was as much about honoring their memories as it was about grappling with the systemic failures that allowed such a tragedy to occur. The neighborhood, once a quiet and tight-knit community, was now a place of mourning. Residents gathered to support one another, many struggling to process how such a devastating act of violence could happen so close to home. "I still can't believe they're gone," said a neighbor, her voice breaking. Kiera and Zoey were such a bright part of this neighborhood. It feels like a piece of all of us is missing. The pain was especially profound for Kiera's family. Her sister, who had been one of her closest confidants, spoke candidly about the void left by Kiera and Zoey's absence. "She was my best friend," her sister said during an emotional interview. "And Zoey, she was just a baby. She had her whole life ahead of her. It's not fair. None of this is fair." In the days following the tragedy, the family organized a vigil in honor of Kiera and Zoey. Hundreds of people attended, holding candles and sharing memories of the mother and daughter who had touched so many lives. The tragedy also prompted a deeper conversation about domestic violence and the resources available to victims. Advocates called for stronger protections for individuals like Kiera, who had sought help but still found herself vulnerable to her abuser. "This case is a wake-up call," said a domestic violence advocate during a press conference. "We need to do better. Better enforcement of restraining orders, better access to resources, and better systems to identify and address escalating threats." As the community mourned, Makia Page, the lone survivor of the attack, became a symbol of resilience. Though she was still recovering from her injuries, Makia began sharing her story in hopes of raising awareness about the dangers of domestic violence. "I'm here for a reason," Makia said during an interview. "I can't let what happened to Kiera and Zoey be forgotten. If sharing my story can help even one person, then it's worth it." Her testimony at a community forum moved many to action. Neighbors, local organizations, and government officials came together to discuss ways to prevent future tragedies and provide better support for survivors. The ripple effects of the tragedy extended beyond Wilson. News outlets across the country picked up the story, sparking a nationwide conversation about domestic violence, gun control, and mental health. Kiera and Zoey's names became synonymous with the urgent need for change. In response, a local foundation was established in their memory. The Kiera and Zoey Foundation aimed to provide resources for domestic violence victims, advocate for policy changes, and create educational programs to raise awareness about warning signs and prevention strategies. "This foundation is our way of turning pain into purpose," said Kiera's sister at the launch event. "We can't bring them back, but we can fight to make sure their story saves others." The home where the tragedy occurred became a symbol of both loss and resilience. While some in the community wanted it torn down, others saw it as a place to reflect and remember. Eventually, the family decided to transform the space into a community garden in Kiera and Zoey's honor. "It's about healing," said a family friend, "turning something so dark into something that brings life and hope." That's what Kiera would have wanted. The tragedy in Wilson left scars that would never fully heal, but it also united a community in its its commitment to creating a safer future. The lives of Kiera and Zoey, though cut short, became a catalyst for change, a reminder of the importance of vigilance, compassion, and action. How can communities turn the pain of tragedy into meaningful action? And what steps can be taken to ensure that the voices of victims and survivors are heard and acted upon? In the aftermath of the tragedy, the community of Wilson, North Carolina, found itself grappling with grief, anger, and an urgent desire to make sense of what had happened. The quiet suburban neighborhood, once defined by its warmth and familiarity, was now the backdrop for a collective reckoning. "We were a close-knit community," said one neighbor. "We looked out for each other. But after this, it's like we all feel a little more cautious, a little more aware of how fragile life can be." The tragedy not only brought profound sorrow, but also ignited a wave of self-reflection within the community. Many questioned whether they had missed warning signs or could have done more to help Kiera and Zoey. "We all knew there were issues," said a longtime friend of Kiera's. "But you never think it's going to end like this. You think it's not my place, or maybe things will get better, and then it's too late." Community leaders quickly mobilized, organizing town hall meetings to discuss what had happened and how to prevent similar tragedies in the future. These gatherings became a space for both mourning and action. "Domestic violence isn't just a personal issue, it's a community issue," said a local advocate during one such meeting. "If we see someone struggling, we need to step up. We need to be their voice when they can't speak for themselves." At the heart of these discussions was a call for systemic change. Many residents expressed frustration with the gaps in the legal and social systems that were supposed to protect Kiera and Zoey. "How does someone with a history of violence get to walk free and buy a gun?" asked one attendee. "We need stricter laws, we need better enforcement of restraining orders, and we need to take threats seriously." These conversations spurred action on multiple fronts. Local officials pledged to allocate more resources for domestic violence prevention programs, while community organizations began offering workshops on recognizing and responding to abuse. For many, the healing process involved finding ways to honor Kiera and Zoey's memory. The transformation of their home into a community garden became a powerful symbol of resilience and renewal. "It's bittersweet," said Kiera's sister, standing beside the garden during its dedication ceremony. "We wish they were still here to see this. But if this garden can bring people together, if it can help someone feel safe, then their loss won't be in vain." The tragedy also led to a surge in volunteerism within the community. From organizing fundraisers for domestic violence shelters to participating in awareness campaigns, residents channeled their grief into meaningful action. "People often think they can't make a difference," said a volunteer at a local shelter. But even small actions add up. Every dollar raised, every hour volunteered, it all helps create a support system for those who need it. Despite the progress, the road to healing was not without its challenges. Survivors like Makia Page faced ongoing trauma, while others struggled with feelings of guilt and helplessness. Counselors and support groups became vital resources for those navigating these emotions. "Healing takes time," said a trauma counselor. "It's okay to feel angry, sad, or confused. What's important is that we don't face these feelings alone." As the community worked to rebuild, they also sought to hold on to the lessons learned. Schools incorporated lessons on conflict resolution and emotional intelligence into their curriculums, while churches and community centers hosted regular discussions on domestic violence and mental health. "This isn't just about remembering Kiera and Zoey," said a pastor during a Sunday service. "It's about creating a future where no one else has to suffer the way they did." That's how we honor their legacy. How can communities continue to honor the memories of those lost to violence while fostering meaningful, lasting change? The tragedy that took the lives of Kiera Massenburg and her 6-year-old daughter, Zoey Jones, was more than a heartbreaking story. It became a catalyst for change. In the months following the tragedy, Wilson, North Carolina, transformed its pain into purpose, ensuring that Kiera and Zoey's legacy would inspire a better future for others. Their story resonated far beyond the small suburban neighborhood. It served as a sobering reminder of the dangers of unchecked domestic violence, the systemic gaps that allow such violence to escalate, and the urgent need for communities to take collective responsibility in protecting the vulnerable. One of the most enduring aspects of Kiera and Zoey's legacy was the establishment of the Kiera and Zoey Foundation. Spearheaded by Kiera's sister and close friends, the foundation quickly became a beacon of hope for domestic violence survivors and their families. "This foundation is about more than just honoring their memory," said Kiera's sister. "It's about making sure no other family has to go through what we did. We're here to provide resources, raise awareness, and fight for systemic change." The foundation's initiatives included funding for shelters, legal support for survivors, and educational programs designed to teach people how to recognize and respond to signs of abuse. Another critical aspect of their legacy was the push for legislative reform. Advocacy groups, inspired by Kiera's story, worked tirelessly to close the gaps in laws that had allowed Daquan Jones to obtain a firearm despite his history of violence. "We can't undo what happened," said a local legislator during a press conference. "But we can honor Kiera and Zoey by ensuring that our laws protect the most vulnerable among us." These efforts culminated in the passing of Zoey's Law, a comprehensive domestic violence prevention bill that included stricter background checks for firearm purchases and mandatory counseling for individuals with restraining orders against them. The educational impact of their story also extended into schools and community centers. Programs designed to teach children about healthy relationships and conflict resolution became standard in Wilson's school district. "It's never too early to teach these skills," said a school counselor. "By helping kids understand empathy and boundaries, we're giving them tools to build safer, healthier relationships in the future." For the community of Wilson, the transformation of Kiera and Zoey's home into a community garden became a source of healing and a place to reflect on the lessons learned. The garden, now a vibrant hub of activity, symbolized the resilience of a community that refused to let tragedy define it. "Kiera and Zoey's light will never fade," said a family friend during the garden's dedication ceremony. "They're still with us, guiding us, inspiring us to be better." The legacy of Kiera and Zoey also inspired changes in how the community approached domestic violence. Churches, businesses, and local organizations partnered to create a network of support for survivors, ensuring that help was always within reach. "This isn't just about one family or one tragedy," said a pastor. "This is about making sure every person in our community feels safe and valued. It's about standing together against violence and fear." As time passed, the pain of Kiera and Zoey's loss remained, but it was tempered by the progress their story had inspired. Their names became synonymous with resilience, advocacy, and hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is light to be found. How can we continue to build a society that not only remembers the lessons of past tragedies, but actively works to create a safer, more compassionate future for all? Kiera Massenburg and Zoey Jones were more than just names in a tragic story. They were a mother and daughter who loved, laughed, and dreamed of a brighter future. While their lives were cut short by senseless violence, their legacy lives on through the actions of those who refuse to let their loss be in vain. This story isn't just about tragedy, it's about the power of resilience and the importance of taking action. Every life lost to violence is a reminder of the work we have yet to do. It's a call to stand up for the vulnerable, to listen, and to act before it's too late. You can be part of the change. Educate yourself about the signs of domestic violence. Support organizations that protect survivors and advocate for systemic reform. Speak up when you see someone in danger, because silence can be deadly. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on how you can make a difference. Share this video, start a conversation, and be a part of the movement to create a world where no one has to live in fear. Together, we can honor Kiera and Zoey's memory and ensure that their light continues to shine. Thank you for watching CrimeByte. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to stay informed about stories that matter. Together, we can illuminate the darkness and bring hope to those who need it most.